the prince's exile, and the road to Byzantium. The name Harald Sigurdsson, known to history as Harald or Harsh Ruler, is synonymous with the violent, fading twilight of the Viking Age. He was a man who lived a saga so vast and brutal that later chroniclers struggled to believe it was real. He was a king who fought in the freezing fjords of Norway, marched across the vast steppes of Russia, earned a fortune in the gilded halls of Constantinople, and died in a final, apocalyptic gamble on the shores of England. He was indisputably the last great Viking. Harald was born into the waning years of the early 11th century, a time when the political unification of Norway was still fragile and contested. His lineage was impeccable. He was the half-brother of Olaf II, the reigning king of Norway, later canonized as Saint Olaf. This blood connection secured his place in the highest echelon of Norwegian society, but it also ensured his participation in the bloody dynastic struggles that defined the era. From his youth, Harald was groomed, not for the quiet life of a noble, but for the brutal life of a warrior, receiving the harsh, pragmatic education necessary for a king's kin. His life took its defining, tragic turn in 1030. King Olaf II, having lost support among the petty chieftains and the nobility who resented his centralizing, Christianizing rule, was facing a massive revolt, secretly backed by the most powerful monarch in Northern Europe, Canute the Great, the Danish and English king. Though only 15 years old, Harald pledged his sword to his brother's cause, riding into the defining confrontation of his youth. The Battle of Stiklestad was a slaughter. The peasant and chieftain armies loyal to Canute vastly outnumbered the small royal host, led by Ola. In the chaos of the battle, Olaf II was killed, and the dreams of an independent, unified Norway seemed to die with him. Harald fought with the furious courage of a desperate teenager, throwing himself into the fray and witnessing the collapse of his family's world. He emerged from the carnage severely wounded, his armor bloodied, his body broken, but his will unbroken. Stiklestad was the trauma that would forever define his quest for power. He was an exile forged in the defeat of his royal house. Harald was forced to flee Norway, his homeland now firmly under the control of Canute the Great, traveling south and east through the dark Scandinavian forests. He gathered a small band of loyal followers, fellow exiles, and desperate men. His flight was not random. Harald knew exactly where to seek refuge. He journeyed to Kiev and Rus, the massive eastern Slavic state, where he sought out his distant relative, Prince Yaroslav the Wise, whose wife Ingerd was related to Olaf II. Yaroslav welcomed the famed warrior and prince into his court, recognizing Harald's immense military value. For the next 3 years, Harald served Yaroslav the Wise with distinction, commanding the prince's armies and military campaigns against the Poles and various nomadic tribes along the Russian frontier. This period was crucial. It gave Harald his first taste of foreign, large-scale warfare, and he began to amass a considerable fortune from the spoils of these eastern campaigns. However, the endless, frigid frontiers of Rus could not contain Harald's ambition. He knew that true wealth and the greatest martial glory lay further south, in the dazzling, mythic city of Miklagard, the great city Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The emperor's personal guard, the Varangian Guard, was composed almost entirely of foreign mercenaries, chiefly Rus, and most famously, Vikings, who were paid in fabulous gold, leaving a disillusioned Yaroslav. Harald led his small army down the river systems of Eastern Europe, enduring the hardships of the treacherous journey until he stood before the awe-inspiring walls of Constantinople. He immediately presented himself and his band of Norsemen to the Byzantine Empress, Zoe, swearing an oath of allegiance to the emperor. For Harald, the service was not about politics or faith. It was about two things: gold and glory. He was about to enter the most elite and dangerous military service in the known world, ready to carve his name into the annals of the Byzantine Empire. The fire of Miklagard commander of the Varangian Guard. Harald Sigurdsson's arrival in Constantinople Miklagard was the entry of a raw, ambitious Northman into the most complex and sophisticated civilization of the known world. His immediate destination was the Varangian Guard, the Emperor's personal elite corps of foreign mercenaries. The Varangians were renowned for their unmatched battle ferocity, their absolute loyalty to the imperial person, not the politics, and their weapon of choice, the massive, two-handed Danish axe. They were the Emperor's axe-bearers, standing above the native Byzantine troops and paid in sums of gold that dwarfed the treasures of any Western king. Harald quickly rose through the ranks, his towering stature, his wounds earned at Stiklestad, and his inherent military command distinguished him. Soon, he was the Apocalyptic, the supreme commander of the Varangian Guard. Under his leadership, the Guard was deployed in the most crucial and dangerous theaters of the Byzantine world. His legendary service saw him campaign across the entire Mediterranean. He fought Muslim pirates and raiders across the Aegean Sea, securing trade routes vital to the empire. Most significantly, he joined the imperial expedition to Sicily under the command of the general George May, fighting a brutal campaign against the ruling Saracens. Harald led a series of successful sieges and land battles, using his Viking ferocity against the disciplined but unyielding Saracen forces. It was in these sun-baked, bloody campaigns that Harald earned his first massive fortunes and his reputation as a ruthless, brilliant commander who never knew retreat. His fame reached its peak during the crushing of the Bulgarian rebellion, deployed by the new Emperor Michael IV. Harald led the Varangian counterattack into Bulgaria, which was engulfed in a massive revolt. Harald's forces showed no mercy. He employed scorched earth tactics, burning towns and defeating the Bulgarian forces in a series of decisive battles. So total was his destruction of the rebellion that he earned the grim Byzantine nickname Miklagard, the burner of the butt. Despite his immense successes in the field, Harald became deeply disillusioned with the treacherous, labyrinthine politics of the Byzantine court. He witnessed the constant, violent rotation of emperors and Caesars, a volatile carousel of poisoning, blinding, and betrayal that made the Norwegian dynastic feuds look amateurish. The man, whose loyalty was supposed to be absolute, realized that the only loyalty that mattered was to gold and survival. His time in Miklagard ended in scandal. Accused of embezzling imperial funds, and perhaps entangled in a scandalous affair with a noblewoman, Harald was arrested and thrown into a dungeon. This was a profound humiliation for a prince and a legendary commander, but confinement could not hold a Viking of his stature. According to the sagas, Harald orchestrated a daring escape, either through brute force or by seizing a rope and chain to descend the high walls of his prison. The final act of his service was characteristic of his character. Before fleeing the city, Harald led his remaining loyal Varangians to the imperial treasuries. He seized the immense fortune he had accumulated over years of brutal campaigns, gold, jewels, and priceless Byzantine relics. Vast, unimaginable wealth. That was his payment for shedding blood across 3 continents with his stolen fortune. His reputation as the fiercest warrior of the age, and a burning desire for a true kingdom, Harald Hardrada turned his back on the east and set sail for the west, ready to reclaim the Norwegian crown that was taken from him in his youth. The return to the north, Byzantine gold, and the unlikely Triarchy, leaving the golden chaos of Constantinople behind. Harald sailed north, no longer a wounded refugee, but a terrifyingly wealthy and experienced warlord. His first destination was his familiar haven, Kiev in Rus. This time, he arrived not as an exile seeking protection from Prince Yaroslav the Wise, but as an equal, bringing with him the accumulated wealth of years spent plundering the treasuries of the Byzantine Empire, a fortune that made him instantly one of the richest men in Scandinavia. His alliance with Yaroslav was quickly solidified through a dynastic marriage. Harald married Yaroslav's daughter, Elisif, known as Elizabeth of Kiev. This was a crucial political maneuver. It fused Harald's legitimate Norwegian bloodline with the most powerful dynasty in Eastern Europe, legitimizing his future claim to the Norwegian throne, and ensuring that, should he need to return to exile, he would be backed by the massive military might of the Rus. The exiled prince was now an internationally connected monarch in everything but name. With his Rus alliance secured and his war chest overflowing, Harald set sail for Scandinavia in 1045. The political landscape of the north had shifted dramatically since the Battle of Norway was now ruled by his nephew, Magnus the Good, the son of the late King Olaf II. Magnus was a popular and militarily successful ruler who had not only secured Norway, but had also defeated the remnants of Canute the Great's Danish Empire, becoming King of Denmark as well. Magnus was formidable, but his constant wars had drained his treasury. Harald initially landed in Sweden, making his presence known to Magnus. This move was calculated. Magnus immediately understood the threat. Harald was a legendary commander with limitless gold and a proven track record of fighting wars against emperors. If Harald were to challenge him for the throne, it would ignite a new, devastating civil war that would destroy the fragile peace of Norway. The powerful Norwegian chieftains, who remembered the slaughter of immediately pressed Magnus to find a peaceful solution. The negotiation between the aging king and the returning warlord was tense and purely pragmatic. In 1046, Magnus and Harald struck one of the most unusual political deals in Scandinavian history. They agreed to rule Norway jointly as The key to the agreement was the Byzantine gold. Harald, who needed legitimacy, agreed to share his enormous wealth with Magnus, who desperately needed funds to continue his relentless war against the Danish claimant, Svein Estridsson, nephew of Canute the Great. For a year, the two men ruled Norway's strange Triarchy, a shared throne divided by ambition and separated by almost 2 decades of experience. The joint reign was abruptly terminated in 1047 when Magnus the Good died suddenly. The circumstances remain shrouded in the mystery of the sagas. One tale suggests a fall from a ship, another a sudden illness. But the speed of the death left many wondering about the intervention of poison or the heavy hand of fate. Whatever the cause, Magnus's sudden demise left Harald Hardrada as the sole, undisputed king of Norway. The exile who had fled Stiklestad had finally achieved the throne of his royal lineage. However, the late King Magnus had made a political will. He willed Norway to Harald, but Denmark was willed to his constant rival, Svein Estridsson. Harald refused to accept this division. He believed his power and right extended over all of Magnus's former dominions. Thus began a brutal 15-year war against Svein Estridsson for the domination of Denmark, a war of relentless raiding, burning, and savagery that would ultimately earn Harald the nickname that history remembers, Hardrada the Harsh Ruler. The Harsh Ruler. 15 years of fire and the Battle of Niså. Upon ascending to the sole throne of Norway, Harald Hardrada immediately rejected the terms of Magnus's will, which had granted Denmark to Svein Estridsson. Harald saw Denmark as a necessary part of his inherited empire and launched a relentless 15-year war to seize it. This war was not a glorious campaign, but a prolonged, brutal exercise in economic and psychological warfare that would forever define the era and solidify his fearsome nickname, Hardrada the Harsh Ruler. Harald's rule in Norway was as iron-fisted as his campaigns abroad. To fund his continuous war machine, he imposed massive taxes, crushed internal dissent without mercy, and centralized power to an unprecedented degree, eliminating the influence of the independent chieftains who had betrayed his half-brother, Olaf. His experience in the Byzantine court had taught him that a king must be feared, not merely loved, and he governed with a calculated, cold ruthlessness. The war against Svein Estridsson was fought primarily at sea and along the Danish coast. Harald avoided large, set-piece land battles where the Danish defense could rally. Instead, he preferred continuous coastal raids, savage strikes that burned towns, destroyed crops, and slaughtered livestock. The goal was to destabilize Denmark economically, exhaust Sweyn's resources, and terrorize the Danish populace into submission. Year after year, Harald would descend upon the Danish coasts, transforming himself into a maritime scourge whose presence was synonymous with fire and death. Using the immense wealth plundered from Constantinople, Harald built and maintained a superior longship fleet. He knew that control of the sea was the key to victory. By 1062, after more than a decade of this relentless attrition, Harald decided the time was right for a decisive, final blow. He challenged Sweyn to a massive naval confrontation. Sweyn, tired of the endless raiding and trusting the loyalty of his Jutland forces, finally agreed to meet him at the River Nisk. The Battle of the River Nisk was the climax of the long, exhausting conflict. Harald's fleet arrived first. Arrayed in the classic Viking formation, longships lashed together to create a floating fortress with the Norwegian king's own magnificent longship, the Ormond's Serpent, at the center. Sweyn's fleet was delayed. Harald, impatient and unwilling to wait, attacked the approaching Danish fleet. The battle raged all night under the moonlight. It was a chaotic, hand-to-hand slaughter fought on the slippery decks of the lashed ships. The combat was ferocious, characteristic of Harald's military command. Harald himself fought with the savagery of his youth, his massive Byzantine axe cutting down every foe near his banner. The sheer force and discipline of the Norwegians, combined with Harald's relentless personal courage, broke the Danish line. By dawn, the battle was a total rout. Hundreds of Danish ships were either sunk or captured. Svein Estridsson barely escaped the carnage, fleeing to a reed bed and later escaping under the cloak of night with the help of a loyal peasant. The victory for Norway was complete and crushing, establishing Harald's naval supremacy beyond any doubt. However, the war had taken its toll. Despite the spectacular victory at night, Harald could not kill Sweyn or occupy Denmark permanently, due to the fierce loyalty of the Danish Jews. After 15 years of endless war, both Norway and Denmark were exhausted. In 1064, Sweyn and Harald finally agreed to a negotiated peace. Harald formally relinquished his claim to the Danish throne, and in return, Sweyn officially recognized Harald as the undisputed sole ruler of Norway. The war had not gained Harald Denmark, but it had secured his legitimacy and solidified his fearsome reputation across the north. Now king of a stable, unified Norway, and with a restless, powerful army at his command, Harald Hardrada began to look beyond Scandinavia. The greatest prize in the North Sea, the throne of England, was becoming vacant, and the aging Viking king sensed one final, glorious campaign. The English prize, the Traitor's Call, and the Great Armada. After 15 grueling years, the war with Denmark ended in a weary stalemate, but Harald Hardrada's restless ambition remained unquenched. Having served emperors and fought in the greatest battles of the known world, ruling Norway alone was not enough. He was the wealthiest man in the north, the most feared commander, and he sought a final, ultimate prize worthy of his Saga, the throne of England. The opportunity arrived dramatically in January 1066. King Edward, the Confessor of England, died childless, instantly plunging the island into a succession crisis. The English Witnagemot Council immediately elected the most powerful English nobleman, Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, as the new King Harold II. Harald Hardrada was one of 3 main contenders to challenge the new king. His claim was tenuous, based on an alleged decades-old pact between Magnus the Good and the former Danish king, which supposedly stipulated that if either died without an heir, the other would inherit his kingdoms. For Harald, however, the pact was merely a respectable pretext for invasion. The true motivation was the lust for a final, glorious conquest and the strategic control of the entire North Sea region. The decisive factor that triggered the invasion was the arrival of a crucial, desperate ally, Tostig Godoinsson. Tostig was the estranged brother of the newly crowned English king, Harold II. Having been exiled from his earldom of Northumbria for tyranny, Tostig sought revenge and power. He sailed to Norway and pledged his sword and his political intelligence to Harald. Tostig promised that the people of northern England, who hated his brother Harald Godwinson's rule, would rise up and welcome Harald as a liberator. The alliance was perfectly timed and utterly irresistible to the aging Viking. Tostig offered the two things Harald lacked: a legitimate-sounding pretext and crucial insider knowledge of England's defenses and political divisions. Harald, convinced that this was his last, greatest chance to forge a North Sea empire, agreed. He began planning the largest and most audacious Viking invasion in over a generation. This summer of 1066 was spent in a frenzy of preparation along the Norwegian coast. Harald used his immense Byzantine wealth to finance the operation. Shipwrights worked day and night building and refurbishing messengers called up every able-bodied veteran who had fought under him in Denmark and Byzantium. The scale of the invasion was breathtaking. Harald commanded a fleet of over 300 longships, carrying an estimated army of between 9,000 and 15,000 hardened warrior force that included his own Norwegian regulars and Tostig's mercenaries. The Great Norwegian Armada set sail in early September 1066, a forest of masts and sails moving inexorably towards the English coast. Harald left his wife, Queen Elisive, and his younger son, Olaf, as regents in Norway, fully intending to return as the undisputed King of England. He believed that Harald Godwinson, distracted by the expected invasion from the south by the Norman Duke William, would be caught completely unprepared for a massive assault in the north. The final, epic chapter of the Viking Age was beginning. Harald Hardrada, the prince who fled the general who conquered in Constantinople, was now sailing to claim a prize that would either secure his name and immortality or consign him and the entire Viking dream to history. Zavritskuri, Fulford Gate, and the fatal Complacency. Harald Hardrada's invasion of England in September 1066 was a masterpiece of strategic timing. The Norwegian fleet sailed unopposed up the Humber estuary, landing its massive army near the town of Rip. The English south was anxiously awaiting the invasion of Duke William of Normandy. The north was left exposed and unprepared. Harald launched a brutal blitzkrieg, intent on seizing the north before King Harald II could react. The local English rulers, the Earls Edwin and Mercar, frantically gathered their northern levies to oppose the invaders. The two forces met on September 20th, 1066, at the Battle of Fulford Gate, just south of York. The battle was a savage demonstration of the overwhelming power and discipline of Harald's veteran army. The English fought bravely in the muddy fields, but they were simply no match for the Varangian Guard veterans and the hardened men who had fought for 15 years against Denmark. Harald, fighting from the front, personally commanded the total destruction of the English forces. The northern English army was virtually wiped out, and the Earls Edwin and Mercar barely escaped with their lives. The crushing victory proved Tostig's initial counsel correct. The north was vulnerable. The city of York, the capital of the north, immediately surrendered to Harald, offering hostages and provisions. For Harald, the victory felt complete. The north was his, and his dream of an English kingdom seemed within his grasp. This triumph, however, bred a fatal complacency. Believing the northern resistance was broken and that King Harald II was still bogged down in the south awaiting the Normans, Harald made a series of catastrophic decisions. He settled his men, savoring the victory. He dispatched a large portion of his army back to the longships at Rickel, a few miles away, to rest and guard the enormous Byzantine treasure he carried. He considered the war effectively over. Harald decided to march with a severely reduced force to the village of Stamford Bridge, a small crossing over the river Derwan to accept the final, formal surrender of the hostages and tribute from the region. Due to the warm weather and the perceived security of the territory, his army marched light. Most men left their heavy chainmail and most of their weapons back on the ships at Rick. They were not expecting a battle. They were expecting a ceremony, but while Harold was savoring his victory, King Harald II of England was executing one of the most brilliant and devastating countermarches in military history. Hearing the news of the invasion and the disaster at Harold II abandoned his defenses in the south and forced his elite housecarls and the rest of his army to march relentlessly north. They covered nearly 200 miles in less than 5 days. A superhuman feat of speed and endurance. Harold Godwinson was marching on a single, burning purpose: to catch the invaders before they could consolidate their position. On the morning of September 25, 1066, Harold's lightly armed troops arrived at Stamford Bridge. They were settling in, perhaps even bathing in the river, when a terrifying sight appeared on the horizon. A massive, heavily armored English army cresting the hill overlooking the river. There was no warning. No scouts had reported their approach. Harald Hardrada, the man who had survived Byzantine treachery and 15 years of naval war, was caught utterly, fatally, by surprise, by the swift vengeance of the English king. The last great Viking saga was rushing towards its bloody and inevitable conclusion. The last stand, Stamford Bridge, and the end of the Viking Age. The surprise was total. The betrayal, absolute. The vast, heavily armored English army stood arrayed before the River Derwent, trapping Harald Hardrada's lightly armed Norwegian force near Stamford Bridge. The Viking king's final, greatest gamble had led him directly into the ambush of his destiny. King Harald Godwinson, the English monarch, paused the assault and sent a messenger across the bridge to his brother. The message was a final, tempting offer. King Harald sends greetings and offers you your earldom back and peace. Tostig famously asked, "What will he offer my companion, Haraldo Shigadosong?" The messenger's reply became the stuff of legend, summarizing the Viking's grim fate. He will offer him 7 feet of English soil, or as much more as he is taller than other men. Harold rejected the offer with a savage roar. The betrayal was now total, and the only path forward was blood. The battle began with a legendary, desperate, delaying action. A single, colossal Norwegian champion, possibly a berserker, stood alone on the narrow wooden bridge, holding off the entire advancing English army. The saga describes him as fighting with a terrifying fury, killing dozens of English soldiers and single-handedly preventing the English from crossing the river and forming their battle lines. It took an English soldier hiding under a tub and floating beneath the bridge to thrust a spear upward through the gaps in the planking, killing the giant from below. With the bridge taken, the main English force flooded across. The Norwegians, realizing the hopelessness of their situation, desperately formed a tight shield wall on the eastern bank. The battle was a ferocious, desperate clash. Harold's men were veterans, but they lacked their heavy chain, which lay 10 miles away and the continuous onslaught of the heavily armored English housecarls began to take a heavy toll. Harald Hardrada fought with the insane, final courage of a Viking facing his end. He donned a brightly gilded helmet and plunged into the thickest fighting, hacking down enemy after enemy, his massive frame towering over the English lines. The battlefield was soon covered in the dead, and the Norwegian shield wall held fast, showing the discipline learned in Constantinople and the ferocity earned in Denmark. The climax arrived in the middle of the afternoon. As Harold fought in a frenzy of rage and determination, an English arrow pierced the throat of the Viking king. A quick, clean, and utterly decisive blow that instantly felled the giant Harald Hardrada, the burner of the Bulgars, and the last great Viking, lay dead on the English soil he had so violently sought to claim. His death momentarily shattered the Norwegian shield wall, but the fighting was not over. The late afternoon saw the arrival of the Rickelmende reinforcements from the ships, running 10 grueling miles in full chainmail. They arrived utterly exhausted, collapsing onto the battlefield to join the hopeless fight. This final, desperate surge was mercilessly crushed by the relentless English army. The destruction was absolute. Of the more than 300 ships that sailed from Norway, only 24 were needed to carry the few Norwegian survivors back home. Among those survivors was Harold's son Olaf, who swore an oath to Harold Godwinson never to attack England again. The legacy of the Viking Age, which had terrorized Europe for 3 centuries, ended definitively on that bridge. King Harold Godwinson, exhausted and triumphant, had saved his throne. Yet, the price of the victory was his destiny. Just 3 days after the battle, he received the chilling news. Duke William of Normandy had landed in the south. Harold II, with his army severely weakened by the battle and the forced march, was forced to turn south and march immediately. 20 days later, the victor of Stamford Bridge would be defeated and killed at the Battle of Hastings. Harald Hardrada's death was not just the end of a king, but the true, fiery end of the Viking saga as a political force in Europe.